Now let's pull together some pieces about nutrients that we've talked about throughout A&P 1 and 2. And again, much of this is repetition. We're just pulling together the pieces that you've seen throughout this entire year of the study of the human body. So nutrients, we talk about these in chapter 1, one of the essentials for life. Nutrients are the substances that we need for growth, repair, maintenance of body structures, making new cells, bulking up bones, muscles, myelinating axons. So those can be calorie containing, which are the macronutrients, or non-calorie containing, which are the micronutrients. So the micronutrients, although they are non-calorie containing, which means that you cannot make ATP directly from a mineral like sodium or directly from a vitamin like K, they're still important in the enzymatic reactions that help us anabolize, it means build up, or catabolize nutrients for growth, repair, and then maintaining body structures. Water should not contain calories, but it's still considered an essential nutrient. And remember, you'll see this in chapter 26 as well, that bodies contain about 50 to 60% water as teenagers and adults, and that number, that percentage, goes down the older we get, primarily because of bone and muscle loss. An essential nutrient, like we talked about with the amino acids, is one that you have to obtain from the diet versus non-essential nutrients, which are ones that we can make in the body. So carbohydrates, which come from fruits and vegetables, they come from our grains as well. Generally, they're used, as far as glucose goes, to make ATP. Neurons in red blood cells prefer to rely on glucose. They can use fatty acids, but they don't like it, which is evidenced by things like headaches and nausea, dizziness, fainting, coma. And then some of the other monosaccharides, like fructose and galactose, are converted to glucose before we use them to make ATP. We've also seen carbohydrates as part of the glycocalyx. So when we talked about blood types, those different blood types were based on glycoproteins that were embedded in the cell membranes. Lipids can be triglycerides. Those are neutral fats. You hear of those in everyday life in terms of unsaturated fatty acids and saturated fatty acids. You don't have to know the difference, but just for your information, the saturated fatty acids are the ones that you find in things like animal lard or animal fat, in butter, solid fats. The non-saturated fatty acids or unsaturated fatty acids are in things like your oils. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good oil, but they're usually liquid. Phospholipids are found in the cell membranes. Cholesterol, which we talked about earlier with liver functions, also found in the cell membrane, where it helps to give some rigidity and stability to the cell membrane, but it's also found in your steroid-based hormones. And as I mentioned in an earlier video, you don't really need to eat much cholesterol in the diet. You can get most of it from the liver making it. An important point to note, cholesterol itself does not contain calories because we don't use cholesterol to make ATP. We use it as a structural component. And I've always found this really interesting, that shellfish is, and fishes are considered to be, pretty quote unquote healthy. However, I think it's 6 medium-sized shrimp gives you about 200 milligrams of cholesterol, which is the maximum that you're supposed to eat in a day. And personally, as a huge lobster lover, this was tragic news when I first learned it, that lobster also contains considerable amounts, pretty much your entire allotment of cholesterol for the day. So what do we do with lipids these are some of the functions. I like to use this acronym to help me remember liver functions. The S is for structure. The L is for long-term energy storage, as opposed to the short-term energy storage that cholesterols provide, that carbohydrates provide. The I is for insulation, as in the adipose layer or subcutaneous layer of the skin. P is for protection, so we get physical protection from fats that are around the joints, that are in the joints, that are around the muscles, around the kidneys, around the eyes. You've probably seen lots of it in your cats, around the heart as well. And then the last S is for signaling molecules such as the prostaglandins, leukotrienes that we've seen in the immune system, and hormones. The last organic compound we'll talk about, last group, is the proteins. And proteins are used in pretty much every facet and every process that I could possibly think of in a human body. This information here about your daily needs for protein is just some interesting information. You know, if you take a nutrition class, you will look at that in much, much more detail and calculate your own protein needs in a day. That amount, the amount of protein that a person needs in a day, is highly variable. It really depends on your gender, your age, your state of health, whether you're highly athletic or you're less athletic. So, as an example, someone that is post-surgery or who's had a broken bone would need more protein than the average person, because rebuilding of all those body tissues requires extra proteins, requires extra enzymes in order to make those processes happen, those chemical reactions that actually help repair the body. So remember that proteins are made of amino acids. If you go back to my discussion on liver functions, I did talk about the fact that there are 20 amino acids. 11 or 12 are considered non-essential. The other 8 or 9 are considered essential. And that number depends on the research source that you look at. So as far as functions in the body, proteins are mostly what's in keratin, that's in your nails and your hair, in collagens, and collagens are the most abundant of the proteins in a human body. Collagens are in dense irregular tissue that surrounds the joints, in dense irregular connective tissue that's in the ligaments and the tendons and the aponeuroses. Elastin that's in the skin and within muscle as well, muscle sarcomeres. Muscle proteins such as actin, myosin, desmin, nebulin, all made of protein. Enzymes, which are those biological catalysts that help speed up chemical reactions in the body so that we can actually utilize them. They happen fast enough to be helpful to us. Everybody's favorite, hormones. Epinephrine, protein-based hormones. Endorphins are protein-based hormones. Serotonin, protein-based hormone. Histamine is another signal molecule that's made from proteins. Neurotransmitters, and I'm sorry I called serotonin and dopamine hormones, they're actually neurotransmitters. The plasma proteins we looked at, albumin, the most abundant, 60% of plasma proteins are albumin. And remember, albumin is made in the liver. It's also an important test often of liver function, of how well the liver is actually doing. Albumin is osmotically active, so it's important in blood plasma to help create colloid osmotic pressure and pull water from the tissues back to blood plasma so we don't end up with edema. That's one way we can. The immunoglobulins, your IgA, D, E, M, G, those are all plasma proteins made of protein, fibrinogen, which helps us create the fibrin clot, so that's stable blood clot, and then the clotting factors that are made in the liver. Okay, so let's go on to vitamins. So we're going to focus our discussion of vitamins and minerals on the ones that you have already seen throughout A&P 1 and 2, just to review those and pull those pieces together. So these are all water-soluble vitamins. And generally, even if you consume these in excess, you will excrete them through urine. So we will not talk about B5 or B7 because those really haven't come up for us in our study of A&P. So for B1, 2, and 3, thymine, riboflavin, and niacin, what you need to know about these in terms of function is that they're important in the metabolism of carbohydrates, specifically in the catabolism of carbohydrates, because they help us form these electron carriers FADH2 and NADH. Just as an interesting point of note for all you future healthcare providers, vitamin B1 is one that is chronically deficient in long-term alcoholics. And if you look over here, you'll see that that's what's partly responsible for the poor coordination or the trembling that you'll see in chronic alcoholics. B6 is required for amino acid metabolism, and we've also seen that in chapter 17 along with B9 and B12 used in the process of red blood cell formation. B9, which is also called folic acid, that's important in utilizing or metabolizing our nucleic acids, the DNA and the RNAs, and amino acid metabolism, which is what we use to make proteins. You should also know that B9, over here it says birth defects, specifically B9 is important in neural tube formation. The neural tube is the beginnings of the brain and the spinal cord. So lack of B9 can lead to conditions like spina bifida. B12, again, almost exclusively found in red meat animal products, is required to complete maturation of red blood cells from the reticulocyte to the mature red blood cell that is anucleic, meaning it doesn't have a nucleus. Vitamin C is most important for us in terms of collagen formation. And we just talked about what collagen is used for. And remember, when we say collagen, we actually mean collagens. It's a group of proteins. So these 4 vitamins are the fat-soluble vitamins. This is one of the reasons that you need lipids or fats in the diet, because they help us absorb these vitamins. Vitamin A is important in making a pigment called retinol, and that pigment allows us to see in the dark. It helps us to see shades of black and white and gray, and without it, we would have night blindness. For us, that's generally not a problem. Its precursor, just as an added piece of information, is beta carotene, which you find in orangey or yellowy vegetables like squashes and peppers. Vitamin D, chapter 6, super important, and chapter 16 is really important because we need it to help us absorb calcium from the diet. The hormone that allows us to use vitamin D to absorb calcium from the intestines is parathyroid hormone. Vitamin E, along with beta carotene and vitamin C, is considered an antioxidant. So it prevents chemical reactions that lead to cellular damage or DNA damage, and that leads to the outward appearance of aging. Vitamin K, right? K for cladding. So we've talked about K several times, important because it is used to make some of the cladding factors, at least 4 of them, that are made in the liver for the coagulation cascade.